What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so the War of Jokes and Riddles is amazing. This story is incredibly good. In this video, we're covering part 1, and then we'll probably upload a second video either later on today or later on this week. That will be part 2, the conclusion of the whole thing. But the War of Jokes and Riddles is incredible. Dare I say, the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. It is probably one of the best stories that I've read in a long time involving Batman. But this comes directly out of the aftermath of Zero Year, which we've covered, and you'll find that down in the Batman playlist in the description. What this also does is it basically follows up to the idea that Bruce Wayne has only been Batman for a very short amount of time. And so this story is basically a retcon. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with comics and you know what that is, bear with me for a second for the people who don't. Retcon is basically, it's short for retroactive continuity. And what it means is that a writer will basically go back to a particular character and put something in their comics that wasn't there before. This is basically a story that was never told before. It was a set of events that had never been hinted to. We didn't know anything about it. And it's basically just throwing it in there now, saying this actually happened. And it's essentially a war between the Joker and the Riddler. And it is, God, it is incredible. So the cool thing is that when it came to Batman Zero Year, when it came to like the origin of the Joker, different things like that, the idea was that it was telling the story of how the Joker became the Joker. But it fit in with the notion of the fact that the Joker's a guy that will always be one of Batman's main villains, if not his most significant villain. And so because of that, following the events of Zero Year, the Joker had just sort of taken off. You know, the guy who would become the Joker eventually became the Joker, and then he would just fight Batman later on. What this does is it takes place before a lot of the Joker stories that we saw after Zero Year. What it also does is featuring, you know, kind of talking about the Riddler for a second, the idea was that the Riddler was a little more involved and a little more complex and more developed in terms of, you know, his storytelling. Now, the reason for this was simple. The idea was that when New 52 first launched and writer Scott Snyder was basically crafting his run on Batman, the idea was to bring the Joker back later on down the line during Death of the Family. Technically speaking, Death of the Family is the first major storyline that we see that features the Joker when the New 52 first launched back in 2011. Following that was Batman Endgame. But the idea was that because the Joker was basically put on the back burner to be used at a later date, Snyder started focusing on things like the Court of Owls and the Night of Owls and different things like that, Two-Face and Riddler and so on and so forth. So Riddler got a lot more attention from Snyder, and it basically dealt with the idea of the Riddler taking over Gotham City, setting up all these traps using the various abilities of different villains, and then ultimately being caught and then being arrested and thrown in jail. The cool thing about this is that Edward Nygma, in a lot of ways, I would say, is more dangerous than the Joker is. The reason for this is because of the fact that yes, the Joker is crazy, and yes, the Joker is zany, and yes, you never know what he's gonna do, but Riddler is all about elaborate schemes, elaborate traps. He may start a sequence of events, and the conclusion of those events will not become readily available or won't even be understood until maybe months or even years after they originally start. And that's the cool thing about him, is because while he's in jail, what he actually starts doing is making friends and talking to people. Now, it's really friends in the sense of the fact that because he was so good at figuring out puzzles and riddles and so on, that what he did is he became a source for various cops who were trying to figure out ways to solve crimes that they could not solve on their own. And what it did, it became kind of an essential figure in the sense that a lot of cops began to get to a point where they needed him. One cop in particular is basically killed by the Riddler, who in turn begins engineering his own escape. And that's kind of the danger of it all, is because what we end up finding out is that one of the guys the Riddler was talking to, the Riddler didn't ask for anything in particular. He wasn't asking for money, he wasn't asking for resources, he just wanted information about other cops. And the reason why is because when he goes to make his escape, he starts running off the names of all these different cops' family members, their wives, their children, their son, basically being told the names of these people, which in turn he's going to use as part of his plan, work perfectly for him, because he doesn't have to lift a finger, he doesn't have to shoot a person or anything. All he has to do is just say, I know who the people are that you care about, and bad things will happen to them if you do not let me go. And ultimately, that's exactly what they end up doing. They end up just stepping out of the way, they unlock the door, and the Riddler goes about his business. Now, the other half of this is the nature of the Joker himself. Again, because this takes place after the events of the first Zero Year story, which dealt with the origin of the Joker himself, this is when he's full on in the scene in Gotham. And so at this point, people are well aware of who he is. But remember, Bruce Wayne has only been Batman for a very short amount of time. And so that trust between society and Batman, such as it is, has not really been built up yet. The other half of this is that because they basically figure out the location of where the Joker is, what they end up doing is basically blowing up his base of operations, just infiltrating the place, trying to take it down, only to realize the Joker's not there. The problem with this, and the issue the Joker struggles with, is that he's lost his ability to laugh. Not in the literal sense. It's more of a metaphorical thing in the sense that the Joker doesn't really find anything funny anymore. And so the goal is to basically find something funny. Now what this does is it sets the Joker on the path of looking at Batman as a guy who's basically the butt of every joke, where it basically begins a process of pitting the two of them together about how Batman needs the Joker needs Batman, that kind of a thing. And that's why it's cool, is because at the end of the day, the Joker taking up residence and doing whatever it is he needs to do, and then ultimately he and the Riddler encounter one another. And the proposition offered here by the Riddler is pretty cool. For them, the idea of cops being corruptible is a very simple thing. All they have to do is make enough money to pay off cops, and then those cops are just sorted, and that's it. But Batman cannot be bought. You know, he's not a person that you can just go commit crimes and then talk him out of arresting you. It doesn't really work that way. And so because of that, the goal is basically the two of them sitting down and saying, hey, look, we can make something that's greater than the sum of its parts. We can literally come together and we can kill Batman. When we do, you'll get whatever it is that you need that will make you laugh. I'll finally topple the bats and we can just conquer the city together and just rule it all together. The problem with this is that this feeds into the unpredictability of the Joker. One of the things that makes the Joker so dangerous is he is just as likely to shoot you as he is to work with you. And in this instance, Riddler doesn't know what the Joker's gonna do. There's no predictability there. There's no real pattern there. The Riddler says there is when he basically says, look, I was able to figure out you were the one that was committing all these acts, and I figured out that you can't laugh because you were basically killing comedians and you were attacking places. You were trying to find a joke that you could laugh about and you couldn't find it, but I can help you solve this riddle. Ultimately, the Joker turns on Riddler, actually just shoots him, and then is just done, and that's it. The problem with this is that, remember, back during this point in his career of being Batman, Bruce Wayne was still very new to the whole thing. He was still very unsure of himself in a lot of different ways. He was still figuring it all out. In this instance, he believes the Joker to be more of a credible threat than the Riddler, also because the Riddler was shot and it looks like he's just gonna bleed out and die. Instead, because of the fact that Batman goes after the Joker, the Riddler's able to escape. He's able to get away, and so is the Joker. And so again, that hits home at the inexperience of Batman, the fact that he doesn't really know what road to take. And so ultimately, this massive war breaks out between the Joker and the Riddler, where various villains are essentially forced to take sides. Now, of course, the other half of this is that this also comes out of the idea of Batman's conversation with Catwoman, in the sense, because of the fact that the two of them are supposed to be getting married to one another, the question is, will she actually do it? And it's one of those things where Batman's just kind of dumping his heart out to the world and telling her everything about himself, his deepest, darkest secrets, so that she goes into a marriage with Batman, basically being sure of what it is she's getting into. And that's why it's cool, because at this point, we basically continue to pick up with the Joker in probably one of his most ruthless moments. Now, on the surface, it doesn't seem that ruthless, it doesn't seem that hardcore, but he actually ends up walking into a home that currently belongs to a family, the Templeton family, walks into their home, and the Joker eliminates them all, literally takes them all out, because he's just trying to find something that's funny. The Riddler ends up coming back by basically getting some surgical work done by a disgraced doctor who had long since lost his career. But the other half of this is the perception that it gives us of the Joker in relation to how the rest of the criminal empire views him. When the Joker calls up a guy by the name of Carmine Infantino, he basically says, look, you have an hour to kill the Riddler, and if you don't do it, bad things are gonna happen. And immediately Infantino's on the job and has his guys taking care of it. He does it reluctantly, but he ends up doing it anyway, because he knows that the Joker will follow through with his scheme. This is essentially a scenario where people are just building up soldiers to their side. When it comes to the Riddler teaming up with Poison Ivy, this was already established in Zero Year, when he used a lot of the things that she had to his advantage in order to basically pull off taking over Gotham, a lot of the traps and different things like that. But when Infantino's guys run up on Riddler and Poison Ivy, they're taken out almost right off the bat. And so, of course, because of that, once Infantino shows back up and the Joker's sitting in his office and he says, an hour's passed and the Riddler's still alive, we end up finding out that the Joker had traveled 3 hours to Metropolis to find the mother of Carmine Infantino, killed her, and then took all of her teeth out of her mouth. That was what he did in response to Infantino not following his directions like he said. And that's why people are so terrified of the Joker, is because of of the lengths he will go to in order to pursue his goal. That's why he's so dangerous. And so ultimately, with Batman essentially discussing this whole thing, it turns into just this massive war. I mean, on one side, you have the Riddler, and you've got, Deathstroke, and you got Two-Face, and you have Scarecrow, and you got Victor Zsasz, and, all these different guys. On the sides of the Joker, you've got Mr. Freeze, you've got Solomon Grundy, you got the Mad Hatter, you got Deadshot. You have these guys who are basically criminals that just kind of go about and they do their own things. But all these different villains that exist in Gotham City are perfectly aware of the fact that the Riddler and the Joker are two of the most dangerous, if not the two most dangerous villains that exist. And so because of that, they basically fall rank and file. They essentially choose their sides with whoever it is they think will ultimately win. Now, the other half of this is something this does is it actually switches over to a completely different guy, a guy by the name of Kite Man. And Kite Man is the best character ever. I love Kite Man. Hell yeah, I love Kite Man so much, but he's got like the saddest story ever. Now, a little bit of history here. Kite Man goes all the way back to 1960 with Batman issue number 133, and he was really more of just like a joke character that was created by Bill Finger. The idea was that Kite Man was like the man who can fly anything is really what it was, and he would just commit crimes by using contraptions largely associated with kites, and then that would just really be it. He'd be caught by Batman, he'd get beat up, and then he would get thrown in jail, or he would end up getting out. He played some roles here and there. He had involvement like Infinite Crisis, different things like that. But for the most part, he was just this background small-time joke character. In this particular story, his origin is traumatic, and he's really this incredibly interesting character because the whole idea of the war of jokes and riddles is not necessarily just the Joker and Riddler going to war against one another. It's the people caught in the middle, and there have been a lot of people caught in the middle of this whole thing. Focusing more on the idea of Charles Brown, the whole purpose of this is that he's one of these guys who had previously worked on the Joker mobile for the Joker, so he's got ties to one of them already. And in his desperation, Batman actually snatches him up, subdues him, and then sends him in to essentially spy on the Joker. The problem with this is that him spying is immediately figured out by the Riddler because of the fact that they have spies on both sides. And so brought before the Riddler, he basically spills the beans. He's eventually brought before the Joker, who figures out where he basically explains everything that's going on. And so again, it creates kind of a weird scenario because ultimately what ends up happening is we basically find out that because the Riddler had realized that Charles was basically a spy for Batman going to work for the Joker and had already been taken by the Riddler, ultimately the Riddler had actually poisoned his son. And so the result is that he basically ends up losing his son. And that's what's so crazy is because what this does is it unhinges him. He's not Joker crazy. He's basically just sort of lost his mind to a degree. And so what ends up happening is he actually just kind of takes massive pieces of fabric, starts cutting them out into the shape of a kite, gives himself a bodysuit, and then just starts calling himself Kite Man. And so as funny as it is, at the end of the day, it's basically this idea that he is a guy who was really stuck in this crossfire and experienced one of the worst traumatic experiences that a parent can ever have, which is losing their child. The other half of this is that we'll actually find out there's a lot more going on with the creation of his character than we originally thought. But with regards to the major event itself, the idea is that with Commissioner Gordon looking at the fact that you basically have the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, which have been taken over by the Joker and the Riddler, the goal is to find a way to bring the war to an end, to basically preserve Gotham City so nobody else has to experience a casualty like this. The crazy thing about it is that when Jim Gordon goes to meet with the Joker, when he goes to meet with the Riddler, he's given demands by both sides in terms of how he's supposed to show up. The Joker just says, show up in your underwear. Because it's the Joker, and when you're the Joker, that's what you do. The Riddler is a lot more complex, as his character should be. Now, the cool thing about this is that this is designed to display two diametrically opposing sides and juxtapose them next to one another. The Joker is simple. He's just a crazy guy who wants to take out Batman. That's it. The Riddler is complicated. He's intriguing. He's got all this lore and all this mythology to him. The other half of this is that the war of jokes and riddles is being fought on a multifaceted level. You basically have criminals fighting in the streets of Gotham City. In this instance, it's Deathstroke, a genetically modified super soldier, against Deadshot, who's just a super accurate guy. But because they're the two greatest mercenaries in the world, their fight spans 5 days and 62 people die in the process. So it is a massive calamity between these guys facing off against one another, and it's a pretty big deal. At the end of the day, it all basically comes down to Batman. It comes down to him as a character having to figure out a way to end this war, knowing that it's not going to stop until the Joker or the Riddler achieve their goal of essentially taking him out. Now, the cool thing about this is that because Batman has the Wayne family fortune at his disposal, what he actually does is he orchestrates a sit down between the Riddler and the Joker. It's basically just them bickering with each other the whole time. Just taking pot shots, and like the Riddler making fun of him and that kind of a thing. But it's interesting to see this happen because it goes down exactly as we would expect, in the sense that they just sort of argue and carry on different things like that. But it's basically them making the case as to why it is that they should be the one to take down Batman. And that's the proposal that Bruce Wayne offers here. Again, they don't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman. They have no idea that the two of them are the same person. And so going through and basically pretending as though he doesn't care about the Batman concept, he doesn't care whether Batman lives or dies, that his loyalty is directly to Gotham City itself. He basically says, both of you guys make your arguments on who it is you think should win, and I'll give $1 billion to the winner, and that'll allow them to pay off all the criminals in Gotham City, pay off the cops, do whatever it is they need to do in order to basically take out Batman. And it's kind of crazy because what we end up finding out is that prior to this sit down, the Joker and the Riddler had basically both brought in hostages under the idea that if something were to happen to them, the hostages would be killed. What ends up happening is the Joker agrees to free his hostages, and the Riddler believes he killed his before he showed up, which he did. It's pretty, I mean, it's not funny, but it's messed up. I mean, it's pretty messed up. I mean, it's kind of rough, but the fact remains here that it is interesting to me because, again, it really hits home with the notion that Bruce Wayne is having to do a lot of things that he never thought he would. When it came to the character of Batman, the idea was to basically be a guy who could essentially walk the middle ground. He could walk the middle line where he was basically always doing the right thing. He'd have to make some questionable choices here and there, but there would be the good guys and the bad guys. And the cool thing about the whole War of Jokes and Riddles story so far is that what it shows us is the lengths that Batman has to go to from now on, to basically be the guy that could take out the criminals, is he will have to become the anti-hero, who will have to blur the lines, that sometimes he's going to have to make questionable choices that will force him to ask the question, am I really a good guy? And so that's kind of the crazy thing about this. And one of the major choices that he makes is he sits down and he says, if I have to pick a winner and if I have to bring this war to an end, and the only way to stop it is to basically take out one of these guys, then which guy do I side with? He basically makes the smarter choice and sides with the Riddler. Because the Joker is so far gone in a lot of different ways, because he's just so crazy, if Batman were to take up sides with the Joker, then the Joker may very well just kill him. At this point, the Riddler and the Joker both want to win. So it's really one of those things where it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but there's no guarantee the Joker would see it that way. If the Joker and the Riddler are at war with one another and their ultimate goal is to take out Batman, but in the short-term goal is to take out the other person, the Joker may bypass all that. The Joker may say, well, I mean, the ultimate goal is to take out Batman, so I'm just gonna take him out and be done, and that's it. And then whatever happens, happens. That's the crazy thing, but the Riddler is a lot more fluid in his thought, analytical in terms of how he looks at things. The Riddler's immediate goal is to take out the Joker, after which then he'll focus on Batman. And so because of that, Batman sides with the Riddler. It's just the smarter choice to make. Now, the other half of this is also using the resources of the Kite Man against both Joker and Riddler, using kites to fly into where the Joker's at. And then in turn, in the middle of the whole conflict, once the Joker's temporarily defeated and the most logical thing happens when the criminals of the Riddler turn against Batman, he basically set things up so that Kite Man could modify the packs, kick him into action, and they would basically yank the criminals out of Gotham City into the air, where they'd be swooped up by Alfred and the Bat Blimp, because apparently the Bat Blimp is still a thing. But the idea here is that this ultimately boils down to the Joker and the Riddler fighting against Batman. But the crazy thing about this is that this is essentially everything Bruce Wayne has been talking about. When he's been going through and recounting this entire story to Selina Kyle, to Catwoman, basically saying, this is where I committed the act that I swore I never would have committed before, we end up finding out that in the middle of this conflict, the only option Batman feels he has in order to successfully take out the Riddler is to kill him. And that's exactly what he ends up doing. He harkens back to the idea of the Riddler killing Kite Man's son. He harkens back to the idea that this war has cost so many lives and has seemingly been pointless. And in that anger, in that wrath, while he is of clear and sound mind, he takes the action of trying to kill the Riddler. Now that's huge for Batman, because it'd be different if Batman just let himself go, right? Like if he just acting out of rage and wasn't thinking clearly and had a temporary moment of insanity and went to go kill the Riddler, that would make a lot more sense for the Batman character in terms of fans letting it slide. I mean, Batman fans will let Batman get away with anything, but in terms of, people looking at it and saying, okay, this is not something Batman normally should have done, him being of clear and sound mind shows us how far and how fast he was able to fly. But again, it really hits back home to the nature of the fact that he's inexperienced, because Batman as we know him now, which is to say, if you go crack open a story from DC Rebirth and you read I Am Bane or something along those lines, Batman is calm. He's almost in complete and total control of his faculties, and he never allows himself to get carried away with wrath or anger, and if he does, it's momentary. It's never a major thing. In this instance, he's still young, he's still reckless, allowing himself to get carried away way falls in perfectly with the idea that he's still trying to figure out his place in this whole pantheon of superheroes in the DC universe in relation to all the criminals that exist in Gotham City. Trying to kill the Riddler is a pretty big deal because what ends up happening is the Joker actually gets in his way and the Joker stops him, and in his insanity finds the whole thing hilarious. But that's what's crazy about it, is because the Joker stopped Batman from killing the Riddler, and that's nuts. It's wild to really think about it that way, that the Joker was the thing that kept Batman from falling over the edge. Now this hits home with the nature of the Joker, right? Like it's a well-established fact. The Joker needs Batman. He needs to have him there. He needs to keep him there. And so it makes sense that he would go that length. But spilling all these beans to Selina Kyle, basically telling her that he allowed himself to fall to that point where he almost became the villain that kills people, he ultimately ends up saying, look, if we're going to do this, you have to know what you're getting into. I've fallen before. I've made that mistake. But Selina Kyle's argument is everyone has. The fact that you did this, all it does is it makes you human. You get carried away. You get angry. You get sad. You get filled with emotion just like anybody else. It's not a failing. It's the fact that you recognize that you fell that makes you great, because it means that you know where you can get down to and you don't want to be there anymore. And that's why it's cool, is because it's her saying, if you get to that point, if you feel yourself slipping, then I will be your guide. I will be the anchor by which I can pull you from the bottom of this ocean of despair and I can bring you back to the light. And so when the question's asked, will you marry me? Selina Kyle says yes. So it's so cool because we're going to see Batman and Catwoman get married. So I'm really excited about this. This is going to be one heck of a ride. It's going to be a pretty awesome thing. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this thing to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.